When a set drops or leaks and the lists of upcoming cards is passed on to the masses, speculation kind of runs wild about what are the sleeper cards or some of the cards that have these very unassuming power levels. Now, a lot of these cards happen to be rares, and sometimes they're mythics where people kind of just get blown away by the turning of the tide that these cards can make. And one of those cards that I want to talk about is actually an uncommon, and it's Risen Reef. And this three cost son of a bitch comes in as a 1/1 that seems harmless, but dear lord, does this thing get crazy if unanswered. And this deck I've called Good Greef, like Reef, R-E-E-F, anyways, has served me well and has a lot of recovery ability when played right. Here it is. Here's Good Greef. It's a very unassuming deck at first because there's not many big powerful cards, but I promise you this deck can really avalanche into something crazy. You'll draw cards, you'll ramp like crazy, and then in very unsuspecting circumstances, you're just going to overwhelm your opponent. Now, we'll go through the list and I'll tell you what the deck does and how to play it. All right, so I have 4 Shock, I have 4 Opt, 4 times Llanowar Elf, 4 Creeping Trailblazers, 3 times Lightning Strike. I have 4 Risen Reef, and this is your main piece, your main squeeze. This is the dude. I've got 2 times Sylvan Awakening. I have 4 Scampering Scorchers, 4 Omnath, Locus of the Royal, 3 times Chandra, Novice Pyromancer, and then your supporting land package. We'll get to the sideboard soon. Now, basically, the way that this deck works is it's kind of a little bit of an aggro kind of aggro deck. It's aggro in the sense that you can really start whittling away your opponent early with Creeping Trailblazer and maybe picking and choosing a little bit about how you want to control the board with Shock and Lightning Strike, etc. But really, once you kind of create a presence of elementals on the board with your Trailblazers and Risen Reef, that's when things get nutty. So what Risen Reef does is that when he hits the board, you look at the top card of your deck. If it's a land, you play it. If it's not a land, you draw it. And he repeats this process for every elemental that hits the board. Now let's just take a look. Now, you might look at this and say, well, there's not that many elementals in here. Where are your, your Healer of the Glades and your Chandra's Cats and stuff like that? Well, you don't need them because ideally what you want to do is on turn 1, you play Llanowar and then you ramp out Risen Reef on turn 3, and then it just snowballs from there. Again, Risen Reef will trigger and it's not a legendary creature, so you can play many of them. It will trigger for every elemental played. Now, that said, Creeping Trailblazer for 2 might already be on the board. Risen Reef into Scampering Scorcher. What does Scampering Scorcher do? It creates 2 1/1 red elemental creatures. They have haste, and they stay on the board. It's not like they go anywhere. So you're going to get 3 triggers on the proper curve of Risen Reef into Scampering Scorcher, which then fills your hand, drops on the board, goes crazy. Now, Nissa might be a problem. She might start throwing lands at you. You might have to chump block. You might have to do things. But at the same time, if you can go wide and stabilize and just chump block with little guys, eventually Omnath will hit the board, do some damage, get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it's a crazy snowball effect. Your Shocks, your Opts, are purely just to start, your Opts rather are purely just to start cycling and looking for Risen Reef if you don't have them. Shock is to get rid of your opponent's Risen Reef if possible, but it's just to stabilize the board early or shock down and finish kills when you're making unfavorable trades. Same with Lightning Strike. Now, Lightning Strike has come into play to win me games. It also goes down as a kill on something like Narset after she triggers, or off of so many different planeswalkers that go down tick right away. At the same time, I just want to let you know the Risen Reef is not a draw effect. It is a place in hand effect, which means that Risen Reef is not affected by Narset. So if your opponent's putting down Narset, you do not have to worry about it. This isn't a deck that uses something like Hydroid Krasis that draws cards. So you're not going to have that limitation from Narset. Omnath is going to come in and pick and choose what you're killing, finishing something off with Shock. Again, Risen Reef fills the board, goes crazy. If you can stabilize, if you can get a completely nutty board with tons of, if you get a full land set and you can stabilize your opponent, eventually you hit him with the punishing blow of Sylvan's Awakening. Now, don't forget, these come in as elementals. And elementals at 2/2 with haste, indestructible, and reach. So you can always play defense with them too, but this is meant to be your killing blow. But Sylvan's Awakening with Chandra as a plus, if you uptick with Chandra, these all become 4/2s with haste, and you just overrun your opponent. A lot of the times this deck can outrace damage decks. It can also go wider than decks that have big creatures, so you can just chump block where you need. It also is fairly punishing for decks like that run Nissa, let's say, because of the fact that eventually if they're attacking with lands, you'll be able to trade into them and kill them, as well as summoning your Scampering Scorchers, getting big Trailblazers to go ahead and chump block, not chump block, but to block favorably or attack favorably, and that's how it goes. It's a very quick deck. If Risen Reef can stick for a turn or two, you know you're in business. Let's go to the sideboard now. The sideboard is pretty much tailored more or less for whatever your meta is going to be. But this is what I have. I have Gravedigger's Cage. A lot of things like to come out of the graveyard these days. This is a really good card to just stop some of those effects. 4 times negate, because there's going to be a lot of times that they're going to want to mess around and really crush you, especially with things like board sweepers, things along those, Kaya's Wraths, or any other card that really is going to crush the board. Negate is in there as well. I have 3 times Fry to kill things quicker and more effectively that things like Lightning Strike can't. Fry can go ahead and kill a lot of Planeswalkers, your Teferis, your Tamios, your Narsets, things like that. I have 2 Narsets in case there's decks that like to draw a lot of cards. Flame Sweep is in there purely if they're doing a lot of early go wide kind of white weenie style stuff. This can come in and help stabilize early. I haven't run into a lot that have given me trouble. Usually shock is enough to keep the board in check in time for you to establish Risen Reef, Scampering Scorcher, etc. But it's there in case you need it. River's Rebuke over here can punish, I can't show it up here, but there it is. River's Rebuke punishes decks that play a lot of tokens, decks like that can go wide with Chandra. You River's Rebuke all of the non-land permanents. Well, are they still lands? I don't even know how that works. Regardless, River's Rebuke is a good reset in order to go ahead and get the board back. Finally, I have 3 times of the big Chandra, big girl Chandra, because if you're going into a control matchup, this can really, really help and put things in your favor. Throw her down. Her spell can't be countered. You uptick her, and then they're on a little bit of a clock that can help you win games in the long run. Anyways, here's the deck. Again, you want to establish early. You want to, if you can, get that Risen Reef off on turn 2 into Scampering Scorcher to start the draw effects and start letting things go. Don't be afraid to chump block early if you need to keep your Risen Reef alive. But take damage where you can, because eventually the more elementals you have, the better it's going to be when Chandra hits the board and upticks, as well as your Sylvan's Awakening, Omnath, etc. You can really get these crazy trains of crazy damage. I remember one match I played, I was down 44-1 against a board that had about 4 or 5 creatures to my 1, and Risen Reef into Scampering Scorcher, into a bunch of draws, into just an absolute, crush fest. So we came back from it, and it was good. Either way, this is the deck, friends. Hopefully it treats you well. So like I said, Risen Reef, if not answered, can really snowball into some crazy, crazy board status and eventually some wins. I hope that you can, get some good land draws, bust that bad boy out on turn 2, and start, going to work, right? So I do appreciate all your suggestions, your comments, and your constructive criticism. It means the world to me. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button down low and drop your comments. You can catch me on Twitch Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern time, and again, sometimes in the evening. Depends how well I eat or how much coffee I have. Nonetheless, be kind to one another. Thank you so much for watching. Adios.